Today we're looking at some NHL trade rumors on the Vancouver Canucks and the Anaheim Ducks. We also have the Hart Trophy finalists. We have some injuries, some playoff updates, some prospect signings, and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. I am recording this on Thursday night before the playoff action gets underway. The games are getting started here shortly. This video is going to not be going up to YouTube for a few hours, so we are going to talk a little bit about what to expect tonight, but at the same time, we're going to be well into the games before you actually get a chance to watch this. So with tonight's action, we have 4 elimination games. We have 4 Game 6s, the Maple Leafs and the Lightning, the Canes and the Bruins, the Blues and the Wild, and the Oilers and the Kings. Can the Toronto Maple Leafs finally overcome all of their playoff struggles and win a playoff series for the first time in almost 20 years? I think it's 18 years since they won a playoff series. We've seen this group lose in the first round a lot. Is this the year they overcome, exercise the demons, and move on? Or can the Lightning at home force Game 7? I don't think the Lightning are going to go away lightly. It'll be interesting to see how things work out. The Canes have the Bruins on the brink of elimination as well, and the Bruins are a team, in my opinion, that you can just never count out. Those guys know how to win. The core group has been around a long time, and it's be interesting to see if they can force Game 7 or not. Minnesota St. Louis has been, let's see, they started off, they split. The last 2 games have gone to the Blues after the Wild took a 2-1 lead. So that is now 3-2 St. Louis, and I'm not sure. I'm kind of leaning towards the Blues, but the Wild are another team. They're going with Cam Talbot tonight over Marc-Andre Fleury. We'll see if that proves to be any different of a result. I mean, I'm not sure we can really blame Fleury on the losses, but at the same time, you have to try something different, I guess. Talbot hasn't played, though, in quite some time. It's been, obviously since the end of the regular season, since he's seen any action. And, of course, the Oilers are trying to survive. Can Connor and Leon will this team to another victory and force a Game 7 against the young upstart Los Angeles Kings? So we also saw last night Sidney Crosby go down with an injury, and it looks like we don't know for sure, but it could be a concussion. And with his history of concussions that he's battled before, I certainly hope for his sake that it's not the case. But he did take a hit from Jacob Trouba in the slot area. Trouba looked like he went in with the stick first, and they did make contact. It was kind of like, some people are calling it like a chicken wing hit, because his arm does come up and it looks like the elbow makes contact with the head. It's hard to say with the angles we have. There's a lot of body contact, but there is some head contact too, and I don't know if we can really definitively tell with what we've been able to see, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen, exactly where he was hit and exactly what he's dealing with. It could be, and all they said in Pittsburgh is upper body injury. That could mean a variety of things. They're not going to tell us, and he's being evaluated, and we don't really know. They have called up a player, though, so that's probably, at the very least, they would do that anyways, a just-in-case measure. So we'll see. It's just really unfortunate for Crosby to go down after the injury. The Rangers went on a bit of a scoring spree, ended up winning the game, forced Game 6. And we'll see where things go between the injury and the Rangers. They ended up winning 5-3. The Panthers went up 1 5-3 last night as well. They have a 3-2 series lead now. Carter Verhaeghe had a really historic night, 5-point game, obviously for the first time in his career, which was awesome. The Flames had a 3-1 victory over the Dallas Stars. Jason Robertson finally gets on the board, but it was after that he scored first, but it was later into the game. It was like into the second period before there was any goals, and then Backlund, Mangiapane scored, and then they had an empty netter. So certainly, the Flames have a little bit of a stranglehold. I'm not sure if Dallas has the offensive firepower to force a Game 7, but we'll see. At least they'll have Game 6 on home ice. Now, of course, today we also saw the nominations announced for the Hart Trophy. There's a lot of fans that are happy over these, and there's a lot that are just upset that their team's player did not get selected and get enough votes to be a finalist. So the finalists are Austin Matthews of the Maple Leafs, Connor McDavid of the Edmonton Oilers, and Igor Shesterkin of the New York Rangers. Now, to be completely honest, in my opinion, I'm not sure who's going to win, but I think all 3 of those players, they deserve to be there. I mean, I don't think you can say that one of the other players who got left out deserves to be there more, or it's just really, really tough, because there's a lot of players this year that deserve to be in that conversation. Like Johnny Gaudreau had a tremendous year, could be in that conversation. I think Jonathan Huberdeau could be in that conversation. Roman Josi, I mean, look at to me, like, he's probably going to win, or at least between him and Makar, they're both guys that could be in the conversation for the Hart too. But like Josi's case, like, look at the point totals he put up, and look at the difference between he and the next closest player in the team. Like, big gap there as a defenseman leading the team in scoring, coming close to 100 points. Like, that's in most years he's not probably just a finalist, he's probably the winner. You got Draisaitl too, could be in that conversation. Like, there's easily probably, like, 7-8 players for sure that could be a Hart Trophy finalist, and that they can't all be finalists. It's just that simple. I'm sure the people doing the voting had a really tough time, but those are your 3 finalists. I mean, a lot of these guys, you could argue that Matthews has Marner. You could argue McDavid has Draisaitl. Now, Shesterkin, on the other hand, being a goaltender, which is not something you get a lot, but he's certainly the main driving force between the success and the Rangers season. I think that's fair to say this year. So, like, in all honesty, you can look at the other guys too. Huberdeau has Barkov. Gaudreau had Tkachuk. Like, Makar has McKinnon and Renton and Landeskog. Like, Leon has Connor. Like, there's lots of these players that have elite talent around them. So it's a really tough conversation. It's a real tough decision. And at the end of the day, I don't know who's going to win, but it's just really, as much as you can make an argument for the other guys I mentioned that I think could be a finalist, it's hard to take any of those other 3 out. So anyways, those are your finalists. I'd love to know what everybody thinks. This seems to be a contentious debate. There seems to be a lot of people having a difficult time because of how the votes go. What the award really means is most valuable. To me, it should almost be like who had the best season, period, or something like that, because it's certainly a situation where I think the definition kind of gets people bumbled up every year and who should win and who shouldn't. But it's they all had phenomenal years. They're all an MVP in some capacity here, and I guess we'll have to wait and find out who wins down the road. Now, of course, as I mentioned, we have a few prospect signings here as well. The Buffalo Sabres announced that they've signed 19-year-old Alexander Kisakov to his 3-year entry-level contract. He had a really solid year over in Russia, playing in the MHL, which is the junior league below the KHL in Russia. 73 points in 61 games played. He was a second-round pick in last year's 2021 NHL draft for Buffalo. So another interesting prospect, having a solid year for the Sabres, looking to make the jump here and hopefully get involved in North American hockey as early as next year. The Edmonton Oilers also signed one of their very interesting prospects, and that's Carter Savoy, who's a 2020 4th-round pick, coming off a tremendous college season at the University of Denver. So Savoy's another guy. I think he could have a real shot at making this team next year. Would not be surprised. Like, he's young, but he's very dynamic and is a real solid offensive player who could be also helping with their salary cap. Like, all these teams have tight cap spaces where he'd be in an ELC. So to me, Carter Savoy is a real solid prospect there for Edmonton. We also saw some changes in Anaheim that I thought were interesting. One of their assistant coaches, Jeff Ward, who was formerly the head coach briefly for the Calgary Flames. Of course, Jeff Ward had taken over from Bill Peters after he was let go under some different set of circumstances there a few years back. Jeff Ward then led as an interim coach for a little while, was later ended up being replaced, of course. And of course, in the case of Ward, he's now has been an assistant coach in Anaheim, and apparently he's leaving the team just due to personal reasons. So we don't really know what those are, but he was no longer being an assistant in Anaheim. And Pat Verbeek also made the decision that head coach Joel Bouchard and Max Talbot, as an assistant for AHL team in San Diego, will not be returning. They've also been relieved of their duties as well. Now, staying with the Anaheim Ducks, we also have some interesting updates on that team. We know one of their younger players. They have a lot of interesting young players that are going to be, forming the core of this team moving forward, but one of them might not be Max Comtois, of course. He's now 23. He's been there a little bit longer than some of their top young talent. But to me, it doesn't look like he has the greatest relationship with his head coach, Dallas Eakins. Had a real tough season, and it's believed that he wants a change of scenery. So Comtois is a player that we could look to see might possibly be traded this offseason if the Ducks can find the right deal for him. Now, there's no guarantee that he's going to be moved. It's not believed that he's actually formally requested a trade. It's kind of one of those scenarios that I think that from what we're reading here on the Anaheim Ducks writers and the reporters, it sounds like the Ducks and Comtois both appear to be open to a deal for a change of scenery, but it's not something that either team or player feels the need to kind of force upon themselves, and it's not 100% sure going to take place. But based on how things went last year, I think it would be welcomed in all assets. Wouldn't be shocking to see him traded for another comparable younger player, somebody who was drafted first or second round, maybe in the last 3 or 4 years that could also benefit from a similar type of scenery change and kind of go from there. I mean, I know there's numerous players out there that you could look around the league and probably go through rosters and pinpoint a few players here and there that would probably make sense. So we will see what happens. They're certainly not going to give him away, but at the same time, like a comparable in return. When it comes to Vancouver now, there's another team we want to talk about. It does appear like head coach Bruce Boudreau is quite likely now to be back. We know that at one point it was looking like there was a really good chance he was going to be back based on his comments, based on what we heard from Elliotte Friedman and some of the Vancouver media. But then after Jim Rutherford spoke, it really put kind of a negative spin on things and makes you wonder if he was really going to be back, because obviously Boudreau was looking for an extension, whereas the team does not want to give him one. They signed him for the remainder of the current season that just ended, and there's an option for next year. They're willing to exercise that option and keep him on as head coach, but they don't want to extend him any further for right now. They want to see how things go a little bit longer. Essentially, as much as they had a fair bit of success, they also had a fair bit of criticism about how the team's played, and they've also had a lot of ideas on how they want to change and upgrade the team and make some additional roster moves. So clearly, it's kind of like, yeah, you did good, but I'm not ready to commit just yet longer term. That's basically where things stand between Jim Rutherford, Patrick Allvin, and how I feel about head coach Bruce Boudreau. But after those comments, a lot of people wondered, like, well, if another team comes calling and offers Boudreau a little bit more job security and a longer contract, would he jump ship? And at this point, it doesn't look that way. He was asked about this from Vancouver media, and he said that essentially he's kind of been relaxing, hasn't been talking to other teams, is only focused on the Canucks, and it sounds like he's going to be back. He said he expects to be back. He said they just have a few small details to work out, essentially, to kind of get things lined up. But otherwise, it sounds like he will indeed be back. I know when the Canucks were meeting with Andrei Kuzmenko as one of the teams that are in the running to land his services, the free agent from Russia has been meeting with NHL teams. He apparently was involved too. It wasn't just management. So I can't see why they would have him involved with player personnel decisions if they weren't sure yet if he was going to be back as head coach for next season. So that sounds quite positive that Bruce will return for at least one more year in Vancouver, and then we'll see where things go from there. Of course, there's been some chatter recently, too. It started on a Hockey Night in Canada segment recently where Jeff Merrick and Elliotte Friedman talked about the Canucks, and part of it was talking about maybe an offer sheet coming this year, that the Canucks might use that tool to try to get themselves a good young player this offseason. And there's also talk about Oliver Ekman-Larsson maybe being on the trade block. And Friedman was on the Donnie and Daly show in Vancouver talking a little bit further about both of those concepts. And he said that the offer sheet concept kind of might have got a little bit misinterpreted a little bit. Essentially, what he boils down to say is he expects Vancouver and Jim Rutherford to be very aggressive this offseason, which is something that Rutherford has normally been as a general manager as long as he's been in that kind of role. We've seen it from him over the years, especially during his time in Pittsburgh, most recently, before he left there. Of course, that was his most recent job as a GM. And obviously, when it comes to him, he's not afraid to make the big moves. He's, pretty aggressive. So we expect to see more of that. An offer sheet very well could be on the table this offseason, but it doesn't sound like there's any definite plans or a particular player that they're targeting. Clearly, if this does happen, it would be something that happened likely after the draft, because we're going to see the draft here coming up. And see, that was part of how the things kind of got mixed up a little bit, was that the draft pick that the Canucks reacquired would be for the upcoming draft. And that draft pick is going to be used on a player at the draft. If an offer sheet is used, that would come after the draft, because when the draft takes place, they're not officially in free agency as of yet. Free agency doesn't start until afterwards. So players wouldn't be eligible yet to get an offer sheet. So it was kind of, I guess the way things were worded on Hockey Night in Canada just kind of wasn't worded the best to kind of describe what they were going to be doing now. Because if they're going to be needing draft picks to do an offer sheet, it would be picks for like next year, not the current year. So we'll see. Doesn't mean that they're not going to do it, but it just means that they're going to be aggressive, and it's a tool that they might be willing to use. When it comes to Ekman-Larsson, though, Friedman did go on to say that essentially that it's going to be obviously complicated given his contract and his, the nature of the term and the money left. Clearly, Arizona holds a little bit of that money, so it knocks it down some, but Vancouver would probably have to eat more of it or have a third party do so, which would get complicated and costly. So, and on top of that, he has full say. It seems like he might be open, from what Friedman said and what I had read elsewhere, that maybe he's open to talking about some potential teams he might be willing to go to. But again, like when he talked to Arizona about going to Vancouver, he didn't give them much to work with, and that's not going to be easy. But he had statistically, like offensively speaking, he had the worst season of his career last year. I know there are some Vancouver media and fans that were relatively happy with his performance last year. I guess based on the role he was given, perhaps he didn't do too badly, but for what he's getting paid, it's just really difficult to justify, and that was the whole part of making that trade was it was really set them back, in my opinion, more than anything, because regardless of what you think of the player or Connor Garland that came with them, it was a lot of money and a lot of term on a player who wasn't going to be your top defenseman. He was never going to be, and that deal probably should have never happened. All those contracts they traded out would be expired now anyway. Louis Eriksson, Jay Beagle, like all those guys that went to Arizona, Roussel, they're all contracts that were expiring. If Vancouver would have stayed put, they'd have all that money off the books right now, and they'd have so much more flexibility, and we'd be in a different circumstance. So we'll see what they're going to do. Friedman thinks that they're definitely trying to find a market for him, trying to see if they can move it, but it's not going to be easy to do. So it's going to be really, really tough. Hard to say, if anywheres, where he might be able to go. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today. Down in the comments, we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.